So again, this is an exchange in June of 2021. You may recall, Ms Sturgeon, that which we looked at this with the current First Minister, one of the characteristics of the fight against the virus in 2021 was that there were a number of large events which ran the risk of spreading the virus, and decisions needed to be taken around whether those should be allowed to go ahead or not. This was a discussion in particular around the decision making with regard to the possibility of cancelling a fan zone which had been put together for the Euros in Glasgow, which it was eventually allowed to go ahead. And the exchange says at 11:45, Professor Leach says, and still it goes on, FM wants more advice. Her instinct says cancel fan zone. Her office will write back, which Ken is writing, to ask for more, and then Ken will gather legal, etc. to reply. Mr Youssef says, yes, she messaged me this morning, wants more detail from GCC around costs involved if we cancel. And then there's some discussion around how much it would cost. £6 million is mentioned. And then at 11:53, Mr Youssef says, £6 million seems cheap for 31 days. Wonder if that factors in costs of food and beverage suppliers would have expected to make over the course of the fan zone, may look for compensation. Either way, if FM is going to cancel, needs to be done soon. She could hold the line and see how we get on and what the scenes on Monday look like. If people behave, then that might settle her nerves. Professor Leach, yep, I think that's costs, not profit. And he says she needs to do it before or at FMQs, if at all. And then Mr Youssef says, I'll tell you what, from knowing her for 15 years, it is not often her instincts are wrong. Both Professor Leach and Mr Youssef, the then Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, seem to be describing the ultimate decision taken in connection with the possible cancellation of this event as a matter which will be governed by your instincts. That's how you made decisions during the course of the pandemic, wasn't it, Ms Sturgeon?
I think had the fan zone been cancelled, that is certainly an accusation that, based on this exchange, could have been made of me. But the fan zone wasn't cancelled, therefore my instinct didn't govern the decision. That was my instinct. I was, the Euros delayed by a year were happening. The fan zone did make me very nervous about people coming together in that way, given what we were dealing with. That was my instinct. I asked for further advice and consideration. That advice came back, and I was persuaded on the basis of the advice that my instinct was not what we should go with. We should go with the advice, and that is the position. You have in managing a situation like this, you have instincts about what's sensible and what's not sensible in a whole host of things. If I had made decisions purely on the basis of that, then that would have been deeply misguided. But I didn't. I had an instinct. I probed the question. I asked for advice through proper channels. I considered that advice carefully, and on the basis of that, agreed that it should go ahead. And as it turns out, I think it was the right decision to allow it to go ahead, because it did not, the risk that I'd been worried about did not materialise.
Would you agree with the proposition, Ms Sturgeon, that the Scottish Government's pandemic strategy was run on your instincts?
No.
Decisions were ultimately made not by Cabinet, but by you and a small band of trusted advisers.
As I've said earlier on, I think the evidence before the inquiry of the Cabinet papers and the Cabinet minutes show that that is not the case. I was the First Minister. I had a responsibility to lead, to try to see the whole picture, when Cabinet Secretaries, rightly and properly, are focused on their own portfolio interests. In any leadership position, you have instincts. You learn to trust, or also to know not when not to trust your instincts. But as this exchange, again, I would say, if this exchange had ended with her instinct is to cancel the fan zone, and at 12 o'clock at First Minister's questions I had stood up and announced the cancellation of the fan zone, that would prove, I think, the proposition you're putting to me. But it didn't. I had an instinct. I tested it with the experts. I asked for advice. I considered that advice, and on the basis of that advice, decided the opposite of what my instinct had started out telling me.